Good morning. So, hope you had a good weekend. Today's class, like last class, we started with data structures. Before that, we completed the C++ syllabus of the year. And we started data structures, which is a 14-mark theory chapter, and then a 15-marker for your lab exams. So, we went through the objectives, then what are data structures, what are the advantages, and what are the classification of data structures like primitive and non-primitive. Again, what are primitive data structures and what are non-primitive data structures, how are they different, and the classification of non-primitive data structures, that is linear and non-linear. Then like what is the relationship between the logical relationship between the elements, how are they placed. Based on that, we differentiate between the primitive and the non-primitive data structures. Then we went through what topics we are going to study in non-primitive data structures, that is linear non-primitive data structures, and what are the operations which can be performed on them. So, in today's class, we will study the description of various data structures starting with arrays, and we will do programs associated with it along with the algorithms, and we will also be doing the practical programs. So, we will be starting with the description. Please pay attention. Description of various data structures. This is mainly the linear data structures. We'll be starting with arrays. And here we'll be doing one-dimensional array only. An array. So what do you mean by an array? By this time you are all familiar with arrays. Like since we had done it in the last year also, again in this year while doing C++, we have done strings, which is nothing but a character array, as well as a list, how to take in the elements, like using for loop, because we'll be knowing the size of the array if you are entering the elements an integer or a other numeric kind of array, and if you are reading a string till the null terminator or the string terminator, we would be reading it. So, how to declare arrays, and what is an array? An array is a homogeneous set of elements. So, when I say homogeneous, it means the elements of the same data type. So, it's a collection of elements of the same data type, and it should be finite, like you don't have infinite arrays here. It's a finite number of homogeneous elements, that is the elements of the same data type under one name, right? Like why do I need arrays? For example, I have to store the total marks of your class. Like for example, your class is 50 students in your class, the strength of your class is 50. Then I need to store the total marks. I am not storing the individual marks here, I am total marks of student. Then I need to create 50 different variables, yes, and everything would be of type float, considering I will have float values also, like half marks would be awarded, so I will have float numbers. So 50 different float variables, and then we all know that no two variables can have the same name. Instead of creating all the 50, I can have it in an array wherein it can be a collection of 50 elements of the type float. I can name it as std marks, right? So that is why, like when you want to have or take in the values for many of the same type, instead of creating that many variables, I can create an array which will be a collection of a list of elements of the same data type under one name. So you will give only one name and using the subscript or the index value. Like for example, if it's the student 1, I can say that it's a 0. So this brackets are used with arrays, and this is the index or the subscript value. Okay, this is the index or the subscript value with the help of which you can insert, edit or retrieve, like you can access the elements of the array. And then we also did, when we did pointers, array name is a constant pointer which points to the first block, like A of 0, first element, memory address of the first element of the array, and it is continuous memory blocks, which means that they are stored physically next to one another. So how many will this have? Like 50 elements I need to store. A float means it will be 50 into 4, because 4 bytes is for one float variable I need to store. So around 200. It will have 200 blocks of continuous memory locations wherein each element occupies 4 bytes of memory, and array name would be having the address of the beginning block. Getting it? Beginning, memory location of the beginning of that. So when you increase it, it automatically, since it is continuous, you can just move from one block to another, and then each one will be of 4 bytes. Like each element, the entire block is of 200 bytes and each element would be 4. So when I increment, it will be incremented by 4 bytes. That also we did. When you increment, it is like depending on the data type, that many bytes would be incremented. If it's a character, it increments by 1 byte, and if it's a float, it is 4 bytes, integer 2 bytes, like that, depending on the data type. That many, like when you shift it, that many bytes would be skipped. Getting it? Hopefully you're able to understand this, because we have already done all this, but just I am repeating so that again it will be a repetition or a revision for you. Then simpler declaration of an array is the data type, the array name and the size of the array. So array is static, that is during compilation time only the size, that many bytes of memory would be allocated for the array. So before the program execution, during compile time, that many bytes of that would be allocated to the array ARR, and ARR would be a pointer to the first block of memory. That is, because it is continuous, you can, the other things would follow one next to another. So we don't have dynamic arrays here, so you need to give the size. When I say size, it would be the maximum size. I can have less than that elements in my array also. Like if I say int ARR of 10, I can have only 5 elements, but then it says that maximum of 10 elements I am going to have in my array. Minimum, it depends on the user. So here I can do, or I can give a constant here, like constant x is equal to 10. I can say int ARR of x. This is allowed because constants are something, const int x here. Yeah, constants are something which do not change the value during the execution of a program. So I can have it here. And again, the array size is always an integer, and even the array subscript, the data type of the subscript or the index of the array is always an integer. It's a repeatedly asked one marker. That is, what is the data type of the array subscript? The array subscript is always an integer. So this is like the size of the array. I cannot have 2.5, right? So it has to be an integer. Like I have 10 elements, this is allowed because it's a constant. The same thing if I say int y is equal to 10, int ARR of y, this will give me error because y is an integer variable. So definitely you can change the value of it during the execution of the program, and array size is decided during the compilation time itself, that many bytes would be allocated. So during runtime you cannot increase or decrease the size of the array. That is why it gives you a error. Please have a look. So now the elements of the array will be stored in consecutive or continuous memory location. Yeah, we discussed this, like the memory location would be continuous, and the number of elements, that is the size of the array, can be given by, or the length is given by the following equation, that is the upper bound minus the lower bound plus 1. Always the lower bound would be 0. Whenever I say upper bound and lower bound, they are the index values, that is the subscript values. So suppose if the array is of 10 elements, then I can say like it would be something like this. This will be a of 0 to a of 9. That is nothing but 10 elements. So this subscript value would be the lower bound, this subscript value, not the value in the array and that location, but the subscript or the index value would be the upper bound. So it will be 9 minus 0 plus 1, which is nothing but 10. So 0 to 9 are 10 elements. Getting it? Please have a look. So this is how a linear array is represented in memory. Which array is this? This is an integer array. How do I know that? By seeing the elements stored in an array. All these are integers. So since it is an integer array, each element is allocated 2 bytes of memory. Yes, that is, it starts from 1000. So 1000 and 1001 would be 2 bytes, that is the first element, a of 0. The 10 is stored in that, then simultaneously the remaining position. So each element is stored in 2 bytes of memory, and you can see that is continuous memory locations. It is continuous memory locations, and this is the index or the subscript value, and this is the value stored in that location or the value of the array elements, and this is the address of the array in bytes. Base address is nothing but the address, that is the starting address of the a of 0 element. That is called the base address. Yes, we have discussed this in pointers chapter also, where I said array name is a constant pointer which points to the base address, or I can say which points to the address of the first element, that is the a of 0th element. So the memory location of the first element is called the base address of the array. Please have a look. Now the types of arrays. The types of arrays are one dimensional with only one subscript, two dimensional. Yes, we did rows and columns, like first dimension would be row and the second would be the column. And then you have multi-dimensional arrays also. Multi-dimensional means which has more than two dimensions. Fine. So have a look about this. Anyway, we will be doing 1D array only. An array with only one row or column. So either you can have one row or one column is called a with only one row or one column is called, like row and column together would be 2D array. So only one row or column is called one dimensional array. It is a finite collection of number of elements of the same type. When I say type, it is the same data type. So can be referred by indexing. So what do you mean by indexing? By the index or the subscript value? Yes, the syntax, the elements are stored in continuous locations. The array elements are stored in continuous locations. Elements x to define one dimensional array. Like you have x elements wherein elements x is a finite number. So you need x elements to define a 1D array. What are those? Int, I can say ARR of x, where x is a number. And it will not be a variable, it will be the size. Basically, I can say size here, the size of the array. Syntax of the one-dimensional array. General syntax is data type, array name, and the size of the array. When I say size, I need to specify the maximum elements. So it need not have any elements, or it can have 1 to n minus 0 to n minus 1 elements. But then this is the maximum size of the array. The n value what you take from the user. Like for example, if I have an array of 100 elements, all the time I need not input the 100 elements. I can ask the user how many elements he needs to enter. But then the size of the array is 100. So the maximum size or the maximum elements the array can hold is 100. So anyway, I can enter less than that also. Next, we'll start with the features of the array. In this array, size has to be a positive number only. That is, the size of the array should be a positive number only. What does it mean? See, as an element, array can, in the list, array can have negative numbers, but the size of the array should be positive. That is the number of elements in the array. The maximum number of elements in the array should be positive, but the elements, that is the array elements, can be negative. For example, I say the size A of 10. So this has to be positive, but I can have A of 0 can store -1. That is fine. But then the size of the array should be positive. Getting it? The string array always terminates with a null character or a string terminator. We had done this, how to read a string till the end of string is encountered. So end of string is nothing but whenever you enter a string, this compiler appends a null or a string terminator, which is the last element of a string, which is nothing but \0, and string is again an array of characters. Array elements are counted from 0 to n-1, which is nothing but 0 to n-1 is nothing but n elements, useful for multiple reading of elements. So please have a look. Next, the calculating the length of the array. Yes, we did this just now. What is the formula? L is equal to upper bound minus the lower bound plus 1. Whenever I say upper bound or lower bound, here I am speaking about the index value of the largest element, that is the last element, and the index value of the first element of the array. Getting it? It is not the small, it is the smallest index value here and the largest index value. I'm talking about, not the value of the element present. I'm talking about the index values here. For example, I have an array A. So what will be the value of 10? Index value is 0. So A of 0, A of 1, A of 2, A of 3, A of 4 and A of 5. So 60 is in A of 5, 50 is in A of 4, 40 in A of 3, 20 in A of 30 in A of 2 and 20 in A of 1, and 10 is stored at the location A of 0. So in this, which is the smallest index value? It is 0. Right? So that is why it will be lower bound is the smallest index value, which is 0. Upper bound is the largest index value. So what is that? 5. Correct? Upper bound is 5. Now put this in the formula. So length is equal to 5 minus 0 plus 1, that is 6. Yes, we do have 6 elements here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is the length of the array. Hopefully you've understood this. The next is the common operations performed on an array. One is traversing. Traversing is nothing but accessing or visiting an element of the array exactly once to do an operation. It can be a comparison operation, yes, or a searching operation, doing it once to an each element. Like you need to visit each element of the array, and we'll be writing one program on this also. Like traversing is nothing but visiting each element of the array exactly once to do a operation. Or I can say increment each element of the array by 10. So I will visit the first element plus 10, second element, the operation is adding it. So or increasing the value of that element by 10. But exactly I need to, if I am doing that, I need to visit each and every element of the array, right? Because I had to increment it by 10, and I won't be visiting it second time, because only one time I will visit and I will increment it by 10. So that is what it means, that accessing each element of the array exactly once to do some operation. The next is searching, that is finding the location of an element in an array. Like I can say, for example, I have an integer array and I have to search whether element 10 is there in the array or not. So what will I do? I will start from the beginning. I will go on comparing each element with 10. If it is there, then I will note down the index location. Index location plus 1 would be the exact value of it, the location value of it, and I will say that the array element is found. For example, after visiting all the elements, if I am not able to get that, I will say the element not found. That is the finding of an element, whether the element is present there or not, and if the element is present, then what is the location of that element. That is searching. The next is sorting. Sorting is nothing but arranging the elements of the array in an order. It can be either ascending order or descending order, but then arranging the elements of an array in an order is called as sorting. Inserting an element, like you already have, see, when I say array of 100 elements, I have entered only the 10, then I want to add 1 or 2 elements extra to an already existing list. So that is called insertion, or inserting an element into an array. So these are the things which I would be basic operations, and then I will also do deletion. Like the same way insertion, I want to delete some elements from the array, that also I can do. So deletion, insertion, sorting, searching and traversing. These are the operations which I can do on an array. And for all of these we will be writing. For traversing, yes, I will write a program for traversing, which also is your first practical program. Please make a note of that, because in the PO board they may take out few programs, but they will not take out the first few programs. So definitely this program would be there in the exam. And PU board, like whenever you go to the exam, they ask class programs only. Many of the examiners insist for a class program. So you won't be getting 30 on 30 if you do not write it as a class program. Then searching, yes, binary and linear search we will do. Sorting, we have insertion, sort, and insertion and deletion. We do have inserting an element of an element into an array at a given location, and deleting an element from an array at a given location. So we will be doing programs for all of these, and along with that I will also be writing an algorithm for it, because in your theory from data structures most of the time they ask you algorithms for the same. Please go through the basic operations of an array. We do have merging. In merging, when you can combine two or more arrays, merging we will not be doing, is just an operation. The next is traversing of arrays, is a process wherein each data element is visited exactly once so that it can be processed. So if I apply the last example, what I said, I have an element of an array and I want to increment each element by 10. So what I have to do, I have to first go to a of 0 and plus 10 I need to do. That is, a of 0 is equal to a of 0 plus 10. So what is a of 0? Like I have to say a of 0 is nothing but a of 0 plus 10. Then whatever is this will get substituted here. Then what it will do? It will take 10, a of 0 is 10 plus 10, which is 20. So it gets substituted. Then I will say I plus plus, where I is the integer variable. I starts from 0 to n minus 1. Then I will say a, again it will go to a of 1, like that it goes till here. So what am I doing here exactly? I am visiting each element exactly once, retrieving it, incrementing it by 10 and storing back. Yes, this is one of the examples of traversal. Please have a look. This is the generic algorithm for traversal. Upper bound is UB. See, another thing, very important point is, many students have the habit of directly writing from step 1. They will not write what are the elements, like what each one means. What is LOC, what is UB, what is A and what is LB in the algorithm. They directly write this, but you won't fetch any marks for this, because I don't know what is LB and UB. So how will I check this? So always make sure whenever you are writing an algorithm, you need to specify what are the terms used in that means. Here I am saying A is a array, LB is the lower bound, UB is the upper bound. A, see, I have specified this, and then you also have to write LOC is the location of the element. Then step 1, LOC is equal to LB to UB. So 0 to n minus 1 you would be doing it. What are you going to do? You're going to process it. Getting it? You're going to process. The process in the last example was addition. That is, you are incrementing the value. So if you're comparing something is like search occurrence of an element. If I say how many times it is repeated, or I can say the frequency of an element. Yes, it is a process. I compare, I'll put a counter. If it is equal to that, I will increment like that. It can be anything, or I can decrease or multiply. You can do many things. So process is nothing but the process what you will do with each element. So you will start from the 0 to n minus 1. You go on retrieving each, doing that process and storing it back and exit. This is the generic algorithm for traversal. Next, we will do a program. Write a program to find the frequency of presence of an element in an array. So what do you mean by that? Say this is your first practical program. Please make a note of this, because these programs has to be class programs. As most of the times the very few external examiners may not insist for a class program, but most of them do insist for a class program only for all the practical programs. So make it a point, even your exam also, you please make sure that you write a class program only, because according to PU board answer key, the class declarations, the variable declaration, member function declaration, each would have marks, and if you don't write it, just a simple void main programs will not fetch you marks. Here, what is the statement? Like, I'll try to explain the frequency of presence of an element in an array. For example, I have an array like this of how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. N is 5, correct? And then the subscript value, for example, the array is A, so it is 1, 2, 3, and this is 4, correct? So 0 to n minus 1, then 5 elements. Now this is already entered value. I have 1, 1, 2, 3 and 4 stored in an array of 5 elements. If I have to search an element 1, so if the element search frequency of the element, I have to find for 1 how many times it is repeated, where the element is 1. The output of this should be 1 is repeated twice. So yeah, what am I doing here? I am comparing. I'll have a counter to begin with, which is 0. Then I will compare the element whose frequency I need to find with the first element. Yes, if it is equal, I will increment the counter by 1, which becomes 1. Then I will go to the next element. I will compare it. If it is same, I will increment the counter by 1, which becomes 2. So then these 3 elements do not match, the counter remains 2. So what I will do, if counter is greater than 0, it is repeated that many times. Else, if suppose I am searching for an element 0, it is not found anywhere, that is why the counter would remain 0 itself. So the frequency is 0 times, that is the element is not there in the list at all. That is the program you need to find. That is, you need to ask the user to enter an array, take in the array elements, ask the user to enter the element whose frequency you are going to check. After that, you are going to compare it with each element of the array, and if the element is found, you are going to make the counter increment by 1. And then after checking with all the elements, in the end you will check whether the counter is greater than 0 or not. If the counter is greater than 0, you will say that the element is repeated or the frequency of the element is this many times, otherwise the element is not found at all. Yeah, it is very simple. Ask the user to enter the array, take in the element whose frequency you need to, and then go on comparing it. If the element is equal to the array element, increment the counter by 1. To begin with, you have to make the counter 0, because if you are not giving an initial value 0 to it, it will give you a junk value. Because to beginning of the program, when I have not even started my comparison, I'll assume that the frequency is 0 only. Then I go on, every time the element is matched, I will increment the counter value by 1, and then when it exists, after comparing with all the elements, I will just check whether the counter value is greater than 0, because if it remains 0 means the element is not found, and if it is greater than 0, then I will write the frequency of that element is that many times. Yes, please go through the statement of this, then we will write the program, and then I will trace the main comparison one, and I will explain. Please make a note of this. This is also your first practical program. And this is an example for traversal, because I am visiting each element exactly once. So please make a note while I write. Let me start the program. Hash include iostream.h conio.h. Okay. After that, I will say class ELE FREQ, element frequency, ELEFREQ. This is the name of my class, because I am finding the element frequency, so let me name it something related to that all. ELEFREQ. Then I will open the curly braces, then I will say private. In that I need to have an array to store the elements, right? So int ARR of maximum 30 elements I will say, and then I need an I for my for loop. N is the number of elements in the array, and I will say ELE, that is the element whose frequency I am going to find, and then I will say count. Okay, count is something like every time the element is such, that is the frequency element is matching with the array element, I will increment the count. So count should be equal to 0, but my class will not allow me to declare and give an initial value here. I have to do it in the constructor, correct? That is what we did in the constructor, that initial values for variables have to be given in the constructor. If I give count is equal to 0 here, it will give me error. So I cannot declare and initialize. But then before I increment the value of count, I need to give an initial value. Otherwise it will give you junk values. Please make a note of this. And I have all this data members in the private section of the class ELEFREQ, element frequency. Now let me write the member functions of it. Fine. So what are the functions I would need? First, I need a constructor, because I have to give an initial value to count. Yes. So constructors are special functions which has the same name as the class name, declared in the public section of the class, and they do not have a return type. Yes, we had done this. So return type is not there. I am declaring it in the public section, and it has the same name as the class name. So I will say ELEFREQ and open and close brackets. This is how I write my constructor in the public section, same name as the class name and without any return type. And this is also a default constructor because I am not passing any arguments to it. So how will it get invoked? Whenever I create an object of this class, the constructor would be automatically run. So in this constructor, I will say count is equal to 0. So when I create an object, the constructor gets executed. When you execute the constructor, the count value is initialized to 0. So ELE, this is the declaration because I am not defining it here. I am declaring it in the class and I will be defining it outside the class. Next, what do I need? I would need an input function. Yes. Why do I need it? Because I need to take in the elements of the array. So for that reason, I will need an input function, that is to read the array elements. So void input. Next, I need to calculate, or I can say check or calculate, because I need to compare and see whether the element is equal to the frequency element or not. And if it is there, that thing I need to do, right? Like, what is the question? To find the frequency of the element in an array. So for that reason, I need to have void, let me have calculate. And then void display. In display, I will be printing my array, and then I will also print the element whose frequency I am checking for, and then how many times it is repeated in the array, or how many occurrence of it, how many times it occurs, or how many times it is present in the array as the output. So I will say void display. And then I will close my class here. So hope you have understood why I am writing each function here. So I have a class ELEFREQ, that is element frequency. In the private section, I have int ARR of 30, that is an array, integer array, which can hold maximum up to 30 elements. Then I have variables I, mainly I would be using for loop. When I would be using for loop? When I am taking in the elements of the array, when I am printing the elements of the array, as well as when I am traversing the array to find the occurrence of the element ELE entered by the user. That is the frequency of occurrence. Not only occurrence. Occurrence means whether it is there or not, but then how many times it is repeated. The question is frequency of the occurrence. That is how many times it is there in the array. 0 to n times, right? Then count. So every time the element is found, I am going to have that count variable which gets incremented, which will start from 0, and by the time you reach the end or come out of the loop, if the element is present, every time the element is present, you are going to increment the count value by 1, and n would be the number of elements in the array. See, the maximum is 30, but as a user, I may not enter all the 30 elements. I can say my array has 5 elements only. So n is the number of elements in the array. Then I have input to read the array, and then calculate is nothing but the traversal operation, wherein I will be checking for the occurrence and how many times, that is the frequency of occurrence also by comparing. And then after that, I am going to display the array entered by the user and also the element whose occurrence I am checking, along with how many times it is repeated, or how many, what is the frequency of the element, repetition of the element in the array. All these three things I would be doing it in the display function. So, and then I do have a constructor, which is a default constructor, wherein I would be giving an initial value to the variable count. Please have a look and make a note of it. Hopefully you have understood why I am writing each. Now let me start with the defining the member functions outside the class. So I will start with my constructor. What is the general syntax of declaring a function inside and defining it outside? That is the written type of the function, name of the class to which it belongs to, scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. This is the general syntax, right? Written type of the function, name of the class to which it belongs to, scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. If there are any arguments passed to it, then you will also have the argument list. This is how we define a function declared in the class outside the class. So since it's a constructor do not have any written type. So I'm not writing that. After that, the name of the class to which it belongs to is element frequency, right? ELEFREQ. This is the name of the class to which it belongs to, scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. So since it is a constructor, constructors are functions which will have the same name as the class name. So ELEFREQ, and then it's a default constructor, so it has no arguments passed to it. Fine. In this, count was a variable of type integer which I had declared in the private section of the class. I am going to give an initial value 0 to it. Getting it? Because to begin with, I am not even checking for the frequency of the element. To begin with, I will start with 0. Every time the element is found, I am going to increment the count value by 1. So to begin with, the value of count is 0. And when will this be run? This gets invoked or executed when you create an object for the class. So default constructor gets executed whenever an object is created for the class without any arguments, because I don't have any arguments. So if you pass arguments, then it has to be a parameterized constructor. Since it does not have any arguments here, it is a default constructor. So this is what in the constructor I am going to do. I am going to give an initial value to the variable count, and the value is 0. Clear? Now let me write the input function. So I'll say, what was the written type of the input function? It was void. The name of the class to which it belongs to is ELEFREQ, scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. So no arguments. It is no arguments, no written. So it is blank over here. After that, first what should I do? I should ask the user to enter the number of elements, that is how many elements would be there in my array. Cout, enter the number of elements in the array, right? So in n, I will say I will store the number of elements which is entered by the user in n. So maximum is 30 elements I can have, but I need not enter all the 30 elements. So I will ask the user like how many elements do you want to enter in your array, and whatever value the user enters, like I say I want to enter 10 elements, so n will have the value 10. So C in n. After that, C out, enter array elements. Now I need to take in n elements, right? I need to read all those elements and place it in the proper location. C out, enter array elements. So endl, this is double quotes, this will be printed. Since I will be doing a repeated action here, and I know how many times I have to repeat. I have to repeat 0 to n minus 1, that is nothing but n times. The loop will execute because I need to take in n elements, so the loop will execute n times. Since I know beforehand how many times the loop gets executed, I will be using for loop. So I will say for I is equal to 0, which is the initialization, I less than n. So why less than n? Because 0 to n minus 1 elements is the maximum. That is 0 to n minus 1 is nothing but the n elements. So I less than n, I plus plus. That is every time I value should get incremented by 1. So C in, what was the array name? ARR of I. So first time the for loop executes, it will go to the initialization part and then the condition. So I, for example, n is 4. That is, I want to have 4 elements, is nothing but 0, 1, 2 and 3. Totally will be 4. So 0th element, it will go 0 is definitely less than 4. It will come here ARR of 0. It will take in the first element. After that, only once the initialization part executes, next it goes to the increment or the decrement part. Here I am incrementing I by 1. I plus plus is nothing but I is equal to I plus 1. So I will come here, the control will come here. I is nothing but I plus 1, 0 plus 1 is 1. It will go and check for the condition. So 1 is definitely less than 3. It will come inside, say in ARR of 1. Like this, it is going to read all the elements. And then once the value of I is greater than, or it becomes equal to n here. So suppose if it becomes 4, 4 is not less than 4, it will go out of the loop. By that time, you would have read all the elements of the array. Now my job is done. I will close my input function. In the input function, I am taking in the value of n, that is the number of elements in the array, and then I am asking the user to enter the elements of the array and taking in the elements of the array ARR. Okay, so I finished my constructor, I finished my input function. Please make a note of this. After this, what should I do? After this, I need to do the traversal operation, right? That is, I need to find the frequency. So let me write the calculate function, because in the calculate function I am actually going to find the frequency of the element. What was the return type of the function? That is void. The name of the class to which it belongs to is element FREQ, scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. Now first thing I have to do is array is read, but then I need to take in the element, right, whose frequency I need to find. So C out, enter the element to check for frequency of occurrence or frequency. Check for the frequency. Cy, frequency, and del. So I have to ask the user, enter the element whose frequency I need to check, because my array is ready. I need to ask the element, then only I can compare. So where will I store it? I will store it in the variable ele, which is of type integer, and I had declared in the private section of the class. After that, what I have to do? After that, I need to go on checking this, whether it is equal to this or not. Correct? So again, how many times I will check? I will check n times, because each element I need to compare. So for I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. If comparison, a decision making statement, whether it is true, do something. I can write a simple if statement here, because I don't have anything in else, because if it is not equal, I won't be doing some any other operation. So I will be writing a simple if statement. Simple if is nothing but an if statement without an else. If ele is double equal to, I have to use a relational operator here, because it will give me a true or a false value, right? ele is double equal to arr of I. So if it is equal to that, what will I do? Count plus plus, and I will close it. If it is not equal, it will not come here itself and increment. And after that, what will I do? Nothing, right? I don't have anything to do here. So I will close it and I will leave it. So this is the end of for, and this is the end of my calculate function. So let me write a trace for this. So for example, I have an array of 1, 2, 3 and 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3 and 3 is my array. ARR of how many elements? 4. So what is the value of n? N would be 4, because I have 4 elements here. And what is the location? ARR of, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2 and this is 3. So 0 to 3 is nothing but 4 elements. And what is the, for example, I will enter ele is equal to 3. Fine. That is, this is my array which I have entered. The value of n is 4 and element is 3, whose frequency I need to put, or I need to find and write. So what will I do here? I is equal to 0, I less than n. What is n? 4. Definitely 0 is less than 4. It will come here if ele, what is ele? 3 is double equal to ARR of I. What is ARR of I? ARR of 0, right? Because the value of I is 0 here. So what is ARR of 0 in this array? It is 1 here. So it is not true. It will not go inside the if. It will go back, since there is nothing in the loop after that. It will go back, increment the value of I. I becomes 1. So now I is 1. 1 is less than 3. Yes. It will come here and check what is the element. Element is 3. Double equal to ARR of 1. What is there in ARR of 1 location? 2 is there. So definitely it is not equal. So it will not go inside if. It will go back, increment the value of I. I becomes 2. 2, again check with the condition. 2 is less than 4. So it will come here ele, that is 3. A error of 2 is definitely 3. So it is true, right? It is true. So it will get inside the if. And what is there inside if? Count plus plus. So count is equal to count plus 1. What was the value of count? In the constructor, I had given the initial value as 0. So 0 plus 1, which is 1. So what is the value of count here? 1. Count has value 1. Then after that, there are no statements here. It will go back, increment the value of I. So I would be 3. Again, 3 is less than 4. It will come here and compare element, that is 3 double equal to ARR of 3. So what do I have in ARR of 3? Again 3. Yes, this is true. So it will come inside and increment the count value by 1. So what was the value of count? It was 1, because initialization happens only once. Next time I had changed that, so count had value 1. So it is 1 plus 1, which is 2. Getting it? Please have a look. And then again it will go back, increment the value of I becomes 4. 4 less than 4? No, it is not true, because 4 is equal to 4. It is neither greater than or less than 4. So it will go out of the for loop and it exits the function. When you exit this function, you would have compared the search element, the frequency element to each one of the elements exactly once, and I have seen that when the search element is 3, the count is 2. That is, it occurs twice. The frequency of 3 is twice. The same way, if I look for 0, it will never go inside the if, because never the frequency element is equal to the element of the array. So count remains 0 itself. It never gets incremented. Correct? Please have a look, make a note, then I will write my display function and later we will do the main. Now let me write my display function. So return type of display was void. The name of the class to which it belongs to is scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. So let me start with the array. See, when the user sees that what he has entered and what was the search element and then how many times it occurs, it can be 0 to n times. That makes a meaningful output, because when you do your lab, the output also carries marks. So make sure that it is understandable to all rather than the programmer. Cout the array elements are endl. Since I am going to do a repeated action, again I will put it in a for loop. For I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. I will say cout ARR of I. Okay. And then single backslash T. What does backslash T do? Backslash T would print a tab space. So it would print me a tab space backslash T. So between the elements, if I don't put any, or I can have a set width also here. If I don't give space, it will appear as a single digit without any spaces in between. So in order to differentiate the elements, give spaces in between. After that, I will close my for loop. So I would have printed the array elements. So I will say cout the frequency element is yearly ended. Correct? Yeah. Now I will say whether it is found or not. You please write it down. Then I will continue this display function only. Now I have to write how many times it occurs. So how will I do? If count is greater than 0, because what will I say? Cout the frequency of the in array is count times. And then I will close if, else cout the element not found in the list. I can say that this will complete my display function. Please have a look. After that, I need to write my main. So, void main clear screen. Now, first I have to create an object, right? How do I create an object? The class name space the object name. So, ELEFREQ is my class name. So, let me say EF is my object. Then, once this line, what happens? The default constructor gets executed and the value of count is initialized. The count variable is initialized to 0. Default constructor is run, right? And next I have to call the function. First I need to call the input function because order is very important. First I need to take in the elements, then only I can do the traversal. After that I will get an output, then only I can write my output. So EF, using the dot operator, I will call the function. Then after that EF dot calculate, then EF dot display, then get ch end of my main. So this completes my program. Hopefully you have understood that. Any doubts you can let me know.